Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and video show which brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, and experience from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm pleased to have a conversation with Frank Wouters. Frank, welcome to the program.
It's my pleasure.
Frank, let me briefly introduce who you are to our audience. You work and live in the Middle East, specifically in Abu Dhabi, where you've lived for so many years. And I see, when I did my homework, a long list of international executive roles leading organizations, associations, all energy related and specific green energy. And I even found somewhere that you are called the Green Hydrogen Evangelist. Welcome to the program. So, how does one become a green hydrogen evangelist? And what does that mean?
Yeah, that's a good one. Good question. So maybe just go a step before the green hydrogen, because as you mentioned, I started my career in the early 90s, and actually my first job was in Africa, and I built my first project was building a wind pump, to provide water for cattle and high value crops, and that sort of opened my eyes to renewable energy. And then when I went back to Europe, I got a job in a consulting company that looked at renewable energy, and we started basically building that business, and we grew with the sector. And maybe now you could say that renewable energy, so solar and wind, but also biomass and other types of renewable energy are relatively mainstream. They're actually the largest growth elements in additions of power generation. But something is still missing there, because with electricity you can do many more things than we were currently doing. But the world of energy is still dominated by molecules, and molecules at the moment are hydrocarbons. It's oil, gas, and coal. And about 10 years ago, I started looking at how to clean up the molecules, and that's where the green hydrogen story started emerging for myself. And the way you can make green hydrogen is basically you take green electricity and you do water splitting. So water is H2O, so that consists of hydrogen and oxygen. And with electricity, you can make hydrogen and oxygen. It's a relatively straightforward process that Frits, you and I, we've done that at school. You take a beaker of water, you put two electrodes in it, and you see little bubbles coming, and that is, in effect, the way that works. Obviously, industrial scale electrolyzers are a little bit more complicated, but the principle is relatively straightforward. So with green electricity, you can make green hydrogen. Now, why am I called an evangelist? And actually, I was recently thinking that I've become a Jehovah Witness of hydrogen more than an evangelist, in the sense that the headwind that the sector has received in the last couple of years specifically reminds me a little bit of basically the stuff that we were facing and the narrative that we were facing in the 90s about solar. This is a niche thing. It's expensive. It can never be the bedrock of a future energy system. And that is completely changed now. Everybody understands that renewable energy can actually be the bedrock of a future energy system. But we're still, going through a similar, discussion and narrative with hydrogen, where there's still too many people that view it as a luxury, something that, let's do electricity first, maybe we don't need hydrogen, etc. And that's where the evangelist in myself comes to the foreground, because I'm 100% convinced that a clean and secure and affordable energy system cannot be built without large amounts of green molecules, and specifically hydrogen.
Okay, because this immediately makes me think of where you have. Are these systems able to exist in parallel, or do you see there's going to be like a competition between various infrastructures? I'm just thinking about when you told your story that you now see when you drive around the country next to being able to pump gas, you also can charge your electric car. The minute you start to introduce hydrocarbon, you need again to introduce a new infrastructure. So, to what extent is that a battle taking place at the moment?
Well, that's certainly a very, very interesting and pertinent question. And then if you focus, as you did on transport and, how you move around, I mean, right now, the number of options are massive, right? I mean, you can charge electricity, you can have LPG, you can have various kinds of diesel, various kinds of gasoline. There is all kinds of fuels that you currently have at your disposal. And I'm not too sure that will be entirely different in the future. Sometimes there's discussion about how should we do electricity or hydrogen. I mean, why should you only have one option? So I think that's one one consideration. The other consideration is, and that's an important one. You mentioned infrastructure. There's been several studies that were done specifically looking at transport support infrastructure. That show that actually a dual infrastructure, so two infrastructures, is cheaper than one. And the reason for that is relatively simple. If you were to completely electrify all transport, which obviously you can do, you need huge amounts of cables, the large power demands in these centers where you have a lot of charging going on, etc. So the idea is that if you combine the two, because it's not an either or question, but if you combine the two, the overall infrastructure costs are actually going to be less. And so in that sense, I don't think that whole debate, should we do this or that, makes a lot of sense. You have to do both. Obviously, there is always limits to capital and, what do you do first, etc. So that's an important question that, it depends on the situation where you are, etc. But I think the end result will be a combination of several factors. And you can also still have biofuels. I mean, there's a lot of waste that we throw away that lies rotting that you can turn into fuels that you could also use for transport. So I think the future will be a variety of things.
Wow, you make it sound quite complex. And I was just wondering when I was into you describing what's happening. What are the elements driving the decision? I mean, I'm hearing cost. I'm hearing the fact that you cannot just afford maybe an infrastructure. To what extent is politics comes into play? Are there other elements which decides what's going to be the outcome? What's your view on that?
Well, I mean, if you're looking at at energy, in the current geopolitical environment, security is another one. So security of supply. We've seen, net energy importers like the European Union, but also Japan and Korea. The European situation was, of course, extremely uncomfortable and very expensive after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, when all of a sudden, our reliance on Russian gas became a huge topic. So prices spiked, everything went through the roof, et cetera, et cetera. So security of supply is definitely something that is on everybody's minds. Now, the beauty of green electricity and green molecules is that you have a lot more options. You're not just looking at a select number of hydrocarbon producers that you have to rely on. You can basically make green hydrogen everywhere, even on the North Pole. Obviously, it'll be more expensive, so there'll be differences in transport costs and production costs, and all of that will play out. But you do have a lot more options. So the switch from a limited number of hydrocarbon suppliers to a much broader set of potential suppliers of green molecules makes a lot of sense from a security point of view. And then it will be, a combination of political factors, like who are your friends, what is the infrastructure that you're going to build to accommodate relationships with friendly nations, cost, obviously, markets, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, politics are necessary to provide, let's say, supporting infrastructure and a general direction, but most of the money will definitely come from again, from the market, from the private sector. So it'll be an interesting trajectory going forward. But I think security is a very important factor in the current environment.
Okay, because I also think of the fact that you're based out of Abu Dhabi, that whole region is known for almost one thing only, and that is the oil coming out of the ground. So to what extent is the green hydrogen an extension of the same hydrocarbons being used? Is that why you're there?
So interestingly, this region is also world champion in renewable energy. If you look at the cost of large-scale solar and wind projects in, for example, the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia, there is no place in the world where they can do it cheaper. So you now have solar energy projects in Saudi Arabia that generate electricity below 1 cent, euro cent per kilowatt hours. Wind is almost there. I think it was $1.3 per kilowatt hours in a recent auction. And that combined with the fact that they're highly industrialized countries based on the low cost fossil fuels that they've had for decades, also makes them really, really good locations to then go and do something with that green electricity that is super cheap, to make also green molecules that are super cheap. You already have the infrastructure, you've got ports, you've got a petrochemical industry, hydrocarbon industry, people that know how to do large projects, etc. So in that sense, it's a natural extension of them being a traditional energy supplier to the world, and they can do the same for green energy if that is what the market demands. So yeah, it's not a let's say a contradiction. It's in my view a natural extension.
Yeah, no.
And I'm because they wanted me to help with renewable energy, specifically in Abu Dhabi.
Yeah. So they reached out to you for support. What did you bring to the table that is okay? You're the go-to person who's going to put this together.
Well, I mean, obviously there is more than just me, but I got here. I was offered a job at Masdar, which was Abu Dhabi's renewable energy champion in 2009, to head the projects division. So as director of the clean energy unit, which was basically the project developer of the company, and we built offshore wind farms in the UK. I built 3 large-scale renewable solar power plants in Spain. I had operations in Germany, of course, in Abu Dhabi, but all over the world. And that was a natural extension of what I've been doing before in Europe, specifically in the Netherlands and Germany.
Okay. Now, I've also noticed looking at your resume that you do a lot of remote work. Is that a deliberate choice to save energy, or is there another reason why so is there an energy saving element of that when you work remotely in the US, in Australia, or is it just more practical? What's motivating you there?
Yeah, I mean that's probably a combination of things. I think we all have learned during COVID. I remember, let's say 10, 15 years ago, video calls like this, they were cumbersome. Sort of the tech never worked. Nobody knew how to unmute them. I mean, most people still don't know how to unmute themselves, but you know what I mean. It is becoming, a very standard tool. So I think all of us, to some extent are very comfortable now in working remotely. So you can achieve things that were maybe a little bit, unconventional 10, 15 years ago. But I wouldn't say it's a deliberate choice. It's just the fact that you can do it now. So you do not necessarily have to travel all the time. So it's more a side effect than a deliberate choice, I would say, for myself.
Good. Okay, but I think it helps also with the image, I guess.
Yeah, of course. Yes. But yeah, I mean, let's also be fair. Some meetings, human interaction, it's not the same. Being on a call or
Oh, I
meeting
agree.
people
Yeah.
and trying to. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think it's like, remember when we invented the internet and paperless blah blah blah. We were never going to use paper anymore. I'm not sure that we're not never going to use paper anymore. And the same with flying. So I'm also, I think we need to clean up flying, and that's been part of, my recent work is looking at sustainable aviation fuels more than anything, because trying to let people not fly is probably harder than cleaning up flying.
Yeah. And okay, let's interesting segue. Could you expand on that a little bit? What does green flying, how does it look like?
Yeah, so flying is obviously a problem. Right now, it's between 2 and 3% of all emissions globally, and it has been growing as a percentage, and of course also in absolute numbers. And predictions are that flying will double by 2050. Now the issue is that when you order a plane right now or you build infrastructure right now, it will probably still be there 20 to 30 years from now. So in terms of how do you reduce emissions in flying, your options are relatively limited because the planes are already there. You're not going to throw them away because you want to have a hydrogen plane. So then, one of the key innovations that that people are looking at, and this is also part of European legislation, is so-called sustainable aviation fuels, and in particular e-fuels, which are made from renewable electricity. Then you turn it into hydrogen. You add some sustainable carbon to make also largely aromatic molecules that you need for flying. And then you have a so-called drop-in fuel, something that is clean because it doesn't have the CO2 emissions associated with it. It's all made from renewable energy, but you don't need to change the engines or the infrastructure or anything like that. So that's, I think, the major opportunity we have to clean up flying and fly without a bad conscience.
Yeah, okay. So, no, I get your point. The whole idea of not traveling, that's not going to happen. So let's clean up traveling. Yeah, something completely different. You're living in Abu Dhabi. How is it to live in Abu Dhabi?
I enjoy it. It's among the safest places on the planet, so you don't have any worry that people that you leave your house open or people steal stuff, because it's really safe. There's hardly any violence. So in that sense, that is certainly an aspect of the quality of life. And right now, if I go outside, it's a very nice European summer day. Obviously in the summer here it's hot, so then we need air conditioning. But in general, life is very comfortable and pleasant, and so very international also. I mean, we have people from all countries in the world. So in that sense, that also provides for variety in cultures, in food, and things that you experience when you interact with other people.
And you do call it. It's not only where you live; it's also what you call home right now.
Yes, we've lived here since 2009, and I've lived in several places in the world, and I've always felt that you have to feel at home where you are, and it sort of comes natural to me. I mean, we lived in Germany for 15 years. I lived in Africa, and now in Abu Dhabi, and I always feel like home is where I am.
Okay, so nothing too long back for once you retire in the future. Could be.
No, no, because I mean, if let's say if we as a family decide to move somewhere else, further east in Asia, I would make myself at home there. So, and I love Netherlands. We have a house in the Netherlands. Whenever I come there, it feels, of course, like home, and it feels very, very comfortable, and it's very organized. The people, etc. So, it's nice. But do I see myself 100% of the time in the Netherlands? Maybe not. Maybe we'll just
Okay.
do whatever we do
See
now.
what happens. Okay. Hey, I want to come back to what you said, which triggered you, your first job in Africa, building a wind park. Have there been other examples of either activities or people which have inspired you? Do you have role models in this industry?
Well, I think the guy that hired me in the Netherlands when I came back from Africa, Ad van Wijk, has always been a role model for many of us. He then went to Delft University, so was professor of future energy systems. He's also been one of the champions of hydrogen in the Netherlands and in the world, and yeah, he's definitely been a role model.
Okay, and where do you, in your work, has it always been smooth sailing, or has it been have there been bumps in the road? Have there been instances where you say, okay, that actually is a big failure, but what did you learn from that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, shit happens, right? And one of the things that happened to us in 2009 was the financial crisis. At eConcern, I was CEO of Developed, the project development arm, and we were just on this massive growth trajectory where we had invested a lot of money in big projects that needed time to materialize to actually return some of the invested capital. And then liquidity dried up. Everybody started panicking, and basically the company didn't survive. I mean, that was one of the most traumatic experiences, obviously. But at the same time, I also learned more in those 6 months than in maybe the other 30 years of my career, and how things work and change, etc. Unfortunately, if you then look back, what the result was of the bankruptcies, that the liquidators, they managed to recoup all the money. So it was actually a sound business, but we didn't survive the credit crunch and the financial crisis. But again, would you have done something else? I mean, what have you learned from it? I don't know. I guess if I'd been in the same situation, would probably be doing exactly the same, to be honest.
So, how did you deal with the people around you? How did you, can you remember what kind of discussions or you had, or support you gave?
Yeah, and sometimes there was a point in time when we had to cut staff. So I had to lay off, I think it was 21 people in one day, and that's not something that I would delegate. So I did it in a one-to-one meeting with each and every one, and I think I was never that tired at the end of that day, because of course you're telling people that you're going to basically screw up their lives. You're going to have a job, you're going to go home to your partner, tell them that you've just been laid off, etc. So there is that element that, but you can't make it better, right? I mean, you can only be straight to the point. You have to tell people, inform them, these are the steps, this is what's going to happen, and then just basically absorb some of the anxiety, and be that sounding board for their anger, the disappointment, their all the emotions, and that was that was a tiring day. I can still remember that. So, but I felt I had to do that personally, because this is something that comes with the job. If you're the CEO, you got to do these things.
Yeah. So if there's bad news, just tell it as it is. Don't beat around the bush, and just
because you can't make it better, right? I mean, so getting a woolly or telling them that that you also feel sorry. I mean, nobody gives a shit, right? Yeah. I mean, what I feel, it's not about me. Yeah. You're telling bad news, and you just have to do that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I understand that. Hey, we're almost out of time, but a couple of questions I still want to ask you before we have to go, unfortunately. First of all, any advice you would want to give young people starting their own journey?
Yeah, that's it. That's always a tough one. Follow your passion. I'm not sure.
No?
Of course, it helps if you're passionate about something, but you also have to do something that makes sense. So find something that makes sense to you as a person, where your qualities are. Not everybody is a visionary, whatever, entrepreneur. If you're not an entrepreneur, don't do it.
Yeah.
Not many people are entrepreneurs. So if you go on TikTok, you might think, let's go and do crypto something and another app and change the world. It's not for everyone. So do something that makes sense and then get passionate about it. And you can be passionate about many things, but don't try to force yourself. Really want to do this or that. If it's not for you, if you're not that type of person, then why would you force it? So do something makes sense and then be passionate about it.
Quick extra question, Frank. How do you know if you're not an entrepreneur? Can you recognize that?
That's you can always try.
Yeah.
Try something. You don't have to do, don't bet the farm, don't quit the day job, but do something on the side, something that doesn't interfere with your life. Just build an app, do something, just do a little side gig on the weekends, etc. And then you can see whether you're actually built for that, whether it's something that excites you. That because when you're selling something, try to sell something. 20 people say no, one will say yes. Now, do you get distracted by the 20 no's and get excited by the one yes, but not enough maybe? So find out. But yeah, it's a hard thing to know, but I think most people actually will probably know about themselves, whether they're entrepreneurs or not, but you can try it.
Yeah. Okay, that's good advice. One last question then. As mentioned at the beginning, you are recognized as the green hydrogen evangelist. Is that also how you want the world to remember you?
Well, I hope that, so the way I see it right now, let's say it's a bit of a 50-50 situation. If you're asking people, is hydrogen going to be big or is it going to go away again like we've seen in the past? Then, I'm 100% convinced that we cannot build a clean energy, reliable and secure and affordable energy system without a whole bunch of hydrogen. So that evangelism will go away when more people realize it. Solar was crazy in the 90s. Now it's not. Hydrogen may be crazy now. In the future, it will not be. So yeah. But obviously, I hope people will later think, yeah, okay, that made sense.
Frank, thank you so much for being on the Brand Called You and sharing your story on, because I would say the green hydrogen part of our energy equation. Thank you so much, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.